Yeah, I'm actually due for blood work again. My regular checkup, sort of biannual or biannual checkup. No, biannual. Yeah.
Twice a year.
Yeah, twice a year, right? Biannual.
Semi-annual.
Last time was great. Last time was great. I was really, really happy with my blood markers across the board. And cholesterol's actually never really been an issue for me. But I guess the reason I bring that up, just sort of joking, is also that it seems to have become sort of a little bit of a topic. Stephen brought to my attention the other day this stuff that he was kind of seeing floating around the interwebs, but thought it might be important for us to talk about this because it's been coming up more frequently in some of the conversations you've been having with your clients. Mm-hmm. And this is not a new conversation.
Not by any means.
No. By any means whatsoever. I mean, we cover some of what we're about to cover years ago before there was a podcast at length in a few different like things that we did. So it's interesting when this came up again because I've been a little bit out of touch with some of those more baseline conversations that you have literally on a daily basis with folks. And interesting. So I started doing math in my head. Okay, when was the last time I really sat down and really had this conversation with somebody? And it was over 5 years ago. About 5 years ago, because that's about the time I kind of stepped back from doing a lot of one-on-one nutrition coaching with kind of people that were kind of at the beginning of their journey. I was coaching people a little further down their journey. And so this just wasn't an issue for most folks. But the point of that is it's the same conversation we were having 5 years ago that we're still having today. And interesting where it's coming from. More interesting is how it came up. And so, I don't know, maybe we just jump right into this, Stephen, with regard to, where has this popped up and why all of a sudden are people talking about it on the interwebs again?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just to preface it. Yeah, this isn't a new conversation at all. This has been a conversation in American society, the American medical system since at least the 70s. And unfortunately the narratives that were created back then are still the same narratives that I hear with my clients today. So I was just, doing the Instagram scrolling. A gentleman that I follow that I do have a good amount of respect for, Metabolic Mike is his Instagram handle. Mike Mutzel. He's been on several health fitness podcasts that I follow.
He does a good job.
Yeah, and I think he's relatively unbiased. Although I was a little curious about this one because I thought that this actually had somewhat of an anti-plant-based slant because this whole conversation lends itself to the low-carb, keto, carnivore tribe versus the plant-based tribe. Like cholesterol is the basis or the battleground for that, for those conversations, a lot of those conversations. Plant-based being, it lowers your cholesterol, therefore it is better for heart disease. And then low carb, keto, carnivore is going to increase cholesterol, and that is, therefore bad for your cardiovascular system. But the study, it caught my attention, which was the idea that Oreo cookies lower LDL cholesterol more than statins.
Okay, so time out. So when you sent this thing to me, I go, oh, Lord have mercy, here we go. What is this clickbait, right? So it obviously pops off the page at you when you're looking at it going, wait, Oreo cookies can make me healthier than a pharmaceutical drug. Well, I mean, at this point in world history, that might not actually be too surprising.
Go on.
Really. But
I'm listening. Yeah.
This one was interesting. It was like, okay, where are they going with this? Going back to how we started this. So this is a very old conversation, and maybe we just kind of stop for a second. All right. So Oreos lower LDL better or the same than statins. We will talk about Oreos and we will talk about statins. But let's first kind of overview cholesterol and what it is and how it functions. And I think you kind of touched on what most people think about cholesterol, and that it is evil. Like, and
at least LDL.
So let's define a few things like LDL, HDL, kind of what it does physiologically and metabolically in the body a little bit. And then we can kind of branch off from there and kind of where we're going with this whole Oreo factor.
Yeah. So we can, number one, cholesterol is something that is necessary. It's something that your body needs. It's something that your body produces, as well as something that you consume via your diet. So this is something that you need to survive. It's necessary for hormone production. It's necessary for maintaining cell membranes. It's necessary for your brain function, for liver function. So we need cholesterol.
Where do you get it from?
So cholesterol is produced by the liver. And then we can also get some cholesterol from our diet as well.
So it's synthesized in the liver.
Yes.
So your body can actually make it from other metabolic components.
Yeah, I think that's important to note that, I 100%. Think some people think that cholesterol is this like exterior or external thing that we only consume that is bad. When our body produces it, it's producing it right now.
Going back to your statement there about like the keto camp, the carnivore camp, and the plant-based camp, and that there's a lot of conjecture about like if you're eating plant or keto-based, carnivore or keto-based all the time, that it's going to increase your cholesterol, more specifically your LDL. This is bad. We'll get to that in a second. But this is likely what stirred a little bit of this conversation, because that is, to your point, sort of the underlying battle that's happening between these camps. If you eat this way, then you're gonna die.
If you eat cholesterol, you're going to
have high cholesterol
or saturated fat, which it's kind of, they get
interchanged.
They get used interchangeably.
Yeah, they get interchanged. They get used interchangeably, but it's not necessarily
the same thing.
So saturated fats can be high in cholesterol, and those foods that are high in cholesterol can be saturated fat. Both can be true, but that isn't the case all the time. So anyhow, so where do they come from? You just kind of nailed it. We get it from, we synthesize it and we ingest it through both plant and animal food. And our body will deal with it the way it needs to deal with it in order to turn it into the right things in order for us to do other metabolic processes with. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you mentioned how the body deals with it, and how the body deals with it is via HDL and LDL. So this is high density lipoprotein and low density lipoprotein. So cholesterol does not travel in our blood independently. You can think of cholesterol needs a ride. Cholesterol needs a taxi. That's a very common way to describe how HDL and LDL, how they work. So lipoproteins are made of both fat and protein. So HDL, which is considered the good cholesterol, it is a higher density of protein versus a lower density of fat. And LDL is the opposite. LDL, the bad cholesterol, is a higher density of fat and a lower density of protein.
Perfect.
LDL is always higher than HDL. And you can think of LDL is sent out from the liver and it circulates, or LDL carrying cholesterol, and it circulates. It takes cholesterol where it needs to go. And then HDL helps clear out the excess cholesterol and bring it back to the liver. So HDL clears it, LDL kind of sends it out.
So two things happening there. One, it some of it stays there, and two, the HDL, and two, some of it goes back. What happens when it stays in the bloodstream?
When the cholesterol stays in the bloodstream?
Yeah, so what's going on there?
Yeah. As far as the issue with excess cholesterol in the bloodstream is it lead to arterial plaque. It can basically stick into your arteries, and that is why LDL is associated with heart disease, atherosclerosis.
Right. So when it sticks in those arteries, right, and it sticks in the blood vessels of the body, then it actually can calcify and it gets hard. So I think people can wrap their heads around that. It gets hard. And so the blood vessels of the body that should be soft and pliable to help move blood and transport other nutrients, they become brittle, or they just become hardened on the inside, and they can become quote unquote clogged as a result. Think about it, you're just pushing this sticky substance through a tube, and it attaches to this one little piece. It attaches to the side of that little tube, and then the next one attaches. Then the next one.
Kind of like drinking a milkshake through a straw. Right?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, and
it accumulates.
It accumulates, and ultimately that can be very bad. You can get blockages. Blockages obviously would not be good if your body is dependent on the transportation of the blood and all the things that come along with that. Blockages are bad, and those blockages can ultimately lead to that atherosclerosis or heart attack / heart disease, or heart disease. So that meaning your your body just simply cannot circulate the blood in the way that it needs to the areas of the body that it needs to. That hardening can happen. Those are two different things that are happening at the same time. One could be causal to the other. And then ultimately you could have things break loose or break free, which could cause total blockages or in some cases get all the way into the heart, where you could have this buildup happen then, and then potentially be moved other places, which could do damage. We start to think about things like strokes and things like that, where, we start to move and block blood vessels within the brain. Very bad, right? So these are things that are very common.
LDL sounds scary.
Every single day in the world, but particularly in U.S. hospitals. And there's probably not a person on this that's listening to this right now or might listen to this that doesn't know somebody that is dealing with this, because heart disease is still the number one killer in
worldwide.
the United States. Yeah, in the United States and worldwide. So it's very likely that you've lost a loved one or know somebody that it was suffered from heart disease and or heart attack, which are a combination of the things that we just talked about. Heart attack being there's a blockage or something breaks free and gets in the way. That is different than like an infarction, which would be a disruption in the electrical current that happens with the heart and how that beat or that the rhythm of that heart
Like
beats.
dysrhythmia.
Yeah, so there's a dysrhythmia. So just a little education on that for people like, okay, so is that the same as a myocardial infarction? No, these are different things. So heart attack is still the number one killer in heart disease, is the number one killer in the United States. That is this buildup of this substance and these blockages and this the deterioration, because if the heart and the surrounding organs are not getting the proper nutrients and blood and oxygen and taking out the waste products and everything else, things die, right? They die. So,
but it's also a culmination. The heart disease is a culmination of other things too, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
but to your point, Stephen, is that sounds really fucking bad. That sounds scary, and it should scare people. I mean, it should be like, if it's the number one killer, like I should be concerned about it.
Yeah, it sounds like
so when we're talking about cholesterol, I think it's really important. I think being scared or being aware is one thing. Being scared is another. Understanding how these things function is ultimately important in terms of how you take care of yourself and what you should or shouldn't be maybe worried about, which leads further down this discussion and how to stay healthy and what is really, unhealthy versus not healthy as it relates to HDL, LDL, and the other things that we'll talk about. So anyway, that's kind of just the little lesson there.
Yeah.
What does your body use cholesterol for?
So hormone production, I think, is a big one. I think that's probably the number one, and maintaining cell membranes. So there's a structural component to it. Those are probably the two biggest, I would say. But I think when we see people with actually very low cholesterol, either HDL or LDL, the hormonal issues is what tends to crop up.
It's usually that there's a multitude of things. It's multifactorial. There's a multitude of things happening that have created a particular situation. You'll start to see like downregulation of hormones, upregulation of others. We will get to a little bit more of that in a second. So that's what your body's using it for. So you need this stuff, right? As you said, it is essential. We must synthesize and or get it in another way. So, all right. Okay. So that's what cholesterol does. That's what it is. That's what it's doing. It can be problematic if we have higher levels of LDL in our bloodstream. But to look solely at that and just the blood marker low LDL and say because it's at a particular level that is bad is a little bit of a broad statement. And I think this is where this discussion starts to lead to, because most people are aware, like we just talked about having our cholesterol checked and our triglycerides checked. Those are two different things, actually, having cholesterol and triglycerides checked. So again, I think there's probably a point for us to kind of stop and talk about that for a second. Like, what are we talking about here? So we already talked about LDL. What's the deal with triglycerides?
So triglycerides are a fat. So both cholesterol and triglycerides are lipids, but cholesterol is not a fat, while triglycerides are. And triglycerides, in a nutshell, are what we consume. Those are the dietary fats, but also other things like carbohydrates primarily, but also protein can be stored as triglycerides. So when we think of triglycerides, again, very broadly, we can think akin to that, the stored fat. The bad fat, the fat that makes me fat.
Right. The stuff that you also use for energy.
Exactly.
Right? And that's what we're trying to
stored energy.
We're trying to lean up or lose weight. That is what we're trying to burn. We're
unlock that stored energy.
Yeah, the stored triglycerides. So triglycerides are important too, right? But to measure only triglycerides or only cholesterol without measuring each, you're leaving a lot off the table. You should be looking at both things.
Yeah. And I think that where this comes up in conversations I have with my clients and consults that I have is, again, we go in, we have our lipids checked, and you get maybe 4 to 5 numbers back. You get your total cholesterol, you get your LDL, you get your HDL, you get triglycerides, and maybe you get total cholesterol to HDL. And then we are familiar with our blood work sheets, and here's the range, and then you get a green check mark or a red X that you're flagging, you're screwed. And oftentimes it'll be, okay, total cholesterol over 200, flag. LDL over 100 or over 150, depending on what range.
2 flags.
And then your doctor or the nurse or whomever has the follow-up discussion with you will tell you, and I've had this exact conversation when my total cholesterol was 206. I was
just
told,
over the 200.
Yeah, I was told that I needed to cut back on my saturated fat consumption, and saturated fat is, no red meat, stop eating eggs, stop eating butter, coconut oil. So you need to, that was essentially what I was, just cut those things back or cut them out entirely. They're bad for you. You don't need them. And that's the conversation a lot of people hear. Or the LDL is a little bit elevated. Same thing. Stop eating saturated fat. No more steak for you. Hope you didn't like it.
Right. With no other explanation of what to do.
No other context.
There's a next step to this often. Like if it continues to stay at 206 and not 200, what would you anticipate the next conversation is going to be?
You should maybe consider a statin. It seems like your cholesterol, pardon me, your cholesterol is, sorry, I had some cholesterol in my throat. Your cholesterol seems to be, elevated, and this needs to be controlled with medication.
Right.
If you already stopped eating all forms of saturated fat, which I'm not going to verify if you've done jack shit with your diet, we're just going to go right to the medication.
Straight to the pharmaceuticals. Here we go again. This conversation comes up a lot on this show, a lot in obviously out there on the floor in the gym, and a lot in life. If you listen to the show enough, our thoughts on that. It's not that we hate pharmaceuticals. We hate how they're being prescribed, right?
Overprescribed.
Consistently and constantly. So the statin basically is let's talk about the statin and what it is, because people may have heard that word, but they don't understand what that means. So what does a statin actually do?
Yeah, it blocks a enzyme that your liver uses to produce cholesterol.
So it's slowing down your own production or synthesis of it. So again, let's go back to, what you're eating, right? Stop eating this stuff is what you've been told. Yet, and you're saying, or sorry, I guess what I heard you say there was like, with no verification, right? No accountability to whether you have or haven't, we're going to give you this and shut down your body's own production or synthesis of this particular hormone, which is what cholesterol is.
Let's try to plug up the faucet, the cholesterol faucet.
Right. And so if we look at going back to the things that it's supposed to, or that it does do in terms of hormone production, right, and cell membrane integrity, obviously that could be problematic if it's not regulated well. So there's already some level of risk in doing this. But statins are one of the most prescribed medications in the history of the world.
At the drop of a hat, they get prescribed.
1,000%. Because it's the easiest thing to say, I took this drug and then I lowered this number. Here's the deal. They work in that sense. They do block that enzyme, period. We know that. But obviously that could be problematic. So there's probably not a person listening to this show that doesn't know somebody or couldn't quite possibly be on a statin. Okay. So that's what the statins do. And okay, go on with the chlorophyll. So we're, again, hopefully that gives people a little bit more of an understanding of kind of what we're talking about here. Cholesterol is a hormone. We need it. Gets synthesized in the liver. We go to the doctor. It flags a little high. quote unquote, quote unquote, high. Doctor says you need to stop eating saturated fat. That is all basically your animal protein, right?
Any fatty cuts of meat outside of red meat. Yeah.
Right. Including, up to and including eggs, as everybody's well known, is very aware. This goes back to the 70s, which is what you brought up at the beginning. Egg yolks are very high in cholesterol, relative to, in concentration to some other things. So those were deemed as evil, for a long time. So stop eating egg yolks, go straight to the egg whites, and this is going to clear up your problem. And when that doesn't work, maybe they have done a really good job of cutting that back, and they come in and they're still flagging, they get this medication. So what gives? Like what's going on there is the question.
As far as the overprescription of the statins?
Yeah, I think we already know the reason for that, right? We already know the reason for that. It's a money grab, as per usual. But it's the one thing the doctor can do to potentially impact this person's health through simply writing a prescription without having any kind of counseling about all the other things that we're about to talk about right now that go into the cholesterol, LDL versus HDL, triglyceride, thyroid, sex hormone, vitamin D, vitamin K conversation. Let's move on to that.
So there's no context that the doctor typically gives. That I think that's the biggest issue, is that these numbers are just seen in isolation as this is flagging, therefore you get this medication, without any understanding of the surrounding context and the nuance that's involved there. So you're talking, why is LDL standalone not necessarily a problem?
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that actually lends itself to the study that was the topic of that started this conversation, which was that Oreos decrease LDL more than statins. And there's a backstory as to why this individual did this study. And I think that applies to the fact that if you are paying attention to your other metabolic markers, LDL or high total cholesterol is not necessarily a causal agent of heart disease. So the little bit of the backstory was, interestingly enough, a study might be a strong word for this case study, or the researcher called it a metabolic demonstration. That was how he described it, which I thought was a pretty apt description.
Fair enough. Yeah.
He was number one, he was experimenting on himself. And so he was both the researcher, again, with a team, but he was also the subject. And he had been on a low carb or keto diet for like 4.5 years prior to beginning the experiment. And he had gone on that low carb keto diet because he was having issues with ulcerative colitis. So he was having GI issues that he couldn't seem to solve. However, when he cut back on carbohydrates, his symptoms of ulcerative colitis declined. And important to note also was that his LDL was 95 prior to starting the
low carb.
Diet.
Yeah, the low carb.
So his LDL at that time was considered in the healthy range. Mm-hmm. So it was below 100. So fast forward, this guy has a theory. It's called the lipid energy theory, which, to cover that pretty quickly, is just what happens when you're on a low carb or keto diet. When your liver glycogen stores are depleted, your body begins using more fat for fuel, and this whole process. So
time out for just a second here. So let's stop and pause on that right there, because this is the reason people do keto, right? Mm-hmm. Or adopt keto or carnivore or low carb diets. Why? Because 99.9 to the millionth time percent, the goal there is two things. One, it's to lose body fat. It's lean up. Yes. The second thing, this was this guy's approach, is the purported benefits of it being an anti-inflammatory inducing diet, right? That we have now cut out some of the things that we might be ingesting that could be creating this inflammation. And for a guy that has colitis, that's a big deal, right? Ulcerative colitis is debilitating, and it's an inflammatory disease, and that's an issue. And so it would make sense that somebody would be searching or reaching for something that may help with those symptoms or the frequency of those symptoms, flare-ups and things like that. And again, moving to like more of a keto, carnivore, lower carb. And in this case, it was keto, correct?
Yeah. Low carb keto was what it was described as.
However we're defining that, right? So for people listening to this, think about this. Well, the other part of this was, where was his LDL prior to adopting this dietary practice, right? And it was health, safe, health, unquote, normal, whatever you want to call it. It was below the marker. And but once he starts eating this other way, we should expect some changes. Why? Because he's now not onboarding the sugar, the carbohydrate that he was ingesting before. Your body's going to need to get that fuel from somewhere. This is where we start moving into that more fat adaptation, right? Or having to utilize triglycerides for fuel. As a result, what would you expect would happen with cholesterol and or the triglycerides that are free floating through a person's bloodstream? I'm going to pause for a second, let the audience think about this. Less sugar, less carbohydrate, less glucose floating around the bloodstream. So where would your body get the energy from, or need to? Probably needs to get it from somewhere. Can't convert into glucose, moves to more triglycerides and fatty acids. So what would happen with the fatty acids within my bloodstream if that was the case? This doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. Yes, for the gentleman in the front row with the blue Red Dot Fitness shirt on.
It's going to go up.
Weird. Correct. So we should expect that to happen. Okay, so anybody that's out there, so think about this. If you're already adopted this lifestyle and this dietary lifestyle, and you are eating that way, you should probably expect
a little increase in your LDL and your total cholesterol. Probably an increase in your HDL too.
Weird.
Yeah, total. Then that was the case with me personally. Was my HDL was also very high. Well, not very high, but higher. Higher. LDL was a little bit higher. Therefore, total cholesterol was a little bit higher. And then I'm being told that, I'm flagging as high risk.
This also might be a good place to put in that there is absolutely 1,000% zero. So I'm going to put that out there again, 1,000% zero empirical evidence that shows that ingesting dietary cholesterol impacts your serum cholesterol. Period.
Which, and that narrative still comes up all the time.
Right.
As far as I eat cholesterol, my cholesterol is going to increase. Same thing. I eat fat. That makes me fat.
There's zero scientific evidence.
Eating blueberries doesn't make you blue.
Zero.
So to bring it back to this case study again, to again, kind of, because this is interesting, and that was kind of why I brought it up, and it lends itself to the conversation as a whole. So yes, as he began this low carb keto diet, his LDL did elevate. What he discovered over time was that he is actually a certain phenotype. He has a certain genetic makeup that is called a lean mass hyperresponder. So not only did his LDL go up a little bit, his LDL went through the roof.
Okay.
So his LDL was extraordinarily high, over 400, close to 500, which if you walked into a doctor's office with an LDL of 500, they would just start stuffing statins into your mouth.
And do open heart surgery all at the same time.
Yeah. So this is like red flag times 1,000 on one of those blood markers or blood tests. However, the definition of this lean mass hyperresponder is an LDL over 200, HDL over 80, so the good cholesterol is also high, and triglycerides, this is an important factor, triglycerides under 70.
Gotcha.
So this gentleman also was metabolically healthy otherwise. He's doing all the work on himself. Insulin was fine. Fasting glucose was fine. All of his other metabolic
inflammatory markers, fine.
Yeah, C-reactive protein, all of those types of things were all within a normal range. So he was metabolically healthy aside from this astronomically high LDL. So the experiment that he did based on his the lipid energy theory was, number one, he did specify this, that he chose Oreos specifically because he knew it would bring attention to his theory and what he was researching.
I kind of love this, that the guy's like, I know what's going to happen. This makes perfectly good sense. Might not make perfectly good sense to a doctor in the doctor's office who's prescribing statins, but I already know what's about to happen here. So I'm going to choose the thing that's going to gain the most attention. So when we put this out there, people are going to
and here we
stop
are
and pause.
talk about it, and it's going to be clickbait.
Yeah,
so in that sense, I respect the hell out of the guy.
Yeah, he absolutely knew it was clickbait, and that was intentional. Because based on his theory, he could have used any form of carbohydrate, but he chose Oreos specifically because he knew it would get attention. So essentially what he did was he ate 12 Oreos a day for 16 days. This was the initial arm of the experiment, the Oreo arm of the experiment. He ate 12 Oreos a day, which if you think about that, that's a gang of Oreos a day. Also important to note, saturated fat.
Depends.
Depends on, if I've had a rough day.
They were in 2 feedings of 6 though.
Yes, yeah. So he split it up into 6 Oreos twice a day.
It's basically like one line. It's like doing a line of Oreos.
Rack them up. Yeah, we're going to rack up our Oreos. So obviously, a lot of sugar, but also a lot of saturated fat, more saturated fat than he was actually eating on his low carb and keto diet. So he does this for only 16 days. He's regularly measuring his lipid numbers. And after just 16 days, his cholesterol, his LDL had decreased by 70%, 71%. So it had gone from like 450 around there to like 270. So it had decreased significantly, essentially just via his body getting some glucose. And then he went through a washout period. So he did 3 months back to his regular diet to reset himself. And then he started on a statin, on intensive statin therapy. So the statin therapy that he would have received had he gone into a doctor's office with LDL through the roof. And the statin did work. And he took it for 6 weeks, and it lowered his LDL by 30%.
17 days to 70%, 6 weeks to 30%.
So the Oreos outperformed the statin by 2 times in terms of lowering his LDL. And obviously, this is a very special case with a very unique set of circumstances. But the idea is that LDL alone is not, it's considered an independent risk factor, but this guy was totally fine otherwise. And he was essentially demonstrating how ridiculous it is to focus solely on LDL because who knows how common this phenotype is. It is people who are typically lean. And actually, I think part of the study was that in these lean mass hyperresponders, as their BMI goes down, their LDL actually continues to increase. So basically, the leaner they get, the higher their LDL gets. And you probably met it, the keto guy, the low carb guy who's shredded,
right? And
then goes to the doctor and gets told, LDL is 180.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. So that was what brought us here today. Thanks to the Oreos.
Yeah,
we're not advocating Oreos as health food, but.
So I love the way this guy approached this. Again, you mentioned a couple of things there. One, he did this for clickbait. Right, he 100% knew what this was going to create. 2, you also mentioned this was a very rare case or sort of a rare individual. But I don't know what that really means. I mean, we don't study sick people or healthy people. Yeah. We only study sick people. So unless the healthy people do experiments or do studies on other healthy people, we're not likely going to know this. It usually doesn't pop up that way. So. That's an important factor here. So can we take this information that we know about Oreos and extrapolate it across everybody and all populations? Absolutely not. That's not what we're trying to do here. But
don't start racking up Oreos.
But the point of this is just how you finish that. But so to measure LDL and call that make that the alarm factor with regard to when a medication should be, prescribed and administered. That's a problem. Again, going back to how many of these statins are being prescribed to how many people across the United States. Let's talk about what those statins can do, right? And we already mentioned their functionality in terms of blocking the enzyme to synthesize the thing. But what else? What are some of the other things with regard that people should understand maybe about these statins, and or just the whole concept around high LDL or high cholesterol?
Yeah, as far the side effects of the statins, and this is just a simple Google search, you just do statin side effects, you're going to get a litany of potential side effects. And of course, it's usually explained away as, oh, this is rare. This only happens in 5% of cases. This only happens in 10% of cases, whatever the case may be. However, if these are being prescribed to millions and millions of people, you are going to get tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people who are experiencing side effects
More.
of the statins. So to kind of explain it away as, well, this is only a small percentage of something that is prescribed, overprescribed, prescribed so readily, this still is affecting a huge population of people. And that's muscle pain, liver damage. One that I think we could stick a pin in is that statins can increase your blood glucose, and the effect seems to be magnified in those who already have elevated glucose. So who comes to
about diabetes?
Yeah. So who comes to the doctor and has elevated cholesterol? Typically someone who is overweight or obese and who is dealing with other comorbidities, other metabolic factors. So this could actually be exacerbating the blood sugar issues that you already have.
I think that's a huge one. When we start looking at those two things in and of themselves, we're talking about potential heart disease, atherosclerosis, and we're talking about diabetes, right? Two of the number one killers that we know about. So I go to the doctor, I have high LDL, but I also have high A1C, right? So I've flagged on two things. I'm likely, if I'm in those, not all the time, but it's a very high possibility that my BMI is also high, right? And so now I'm flagging for three things, right? It's also likely at that point, if I'm there, that my inflammatory markers might also be high because my body is really struggling right now. And so there's this whole sort of group of things that are against me or working against me. And my doctor's job is to keep me from dying, right? And not necessarily make me healthier, but keep me from dying. And
slap a Band-Aid on.
So what are the answers to this? The answers would be obviously start throwing some pharmaceuticals at it and some drugs at it. And the person that's afraid of dying that already knows they're unhealthy is going to gladly take those, right? Okay. And I don't have to pay for it. I mean, insurance does that for me. Yeah. So like, why wouldn't I? Okay, so that's kind of like the morbid side of this.
And some people do need the life jacket, as we've talked about before.
That's the next point. And like, if you're in that situation, you take the life jacket. But what are you doing to get back to the boat or get back to shore, whatever it is, to correct your situation? But I want to go back to the whole, high blood glucose thing, blood glucose thing, A1C, HDL, high HDL or LDL. There is some evidence to suggest that taking some of these medications that lower your blood glucose, right, by doing certain things like blocking, again, certain things and upregulating other things, like drugs like metformin, would also contribute to the challenges that we've already discussed here with regard to LDL. So I could be taking a statin, which then could impact my blood glucose, which would then get me on a drug like metformin.
Some metformin, which could then contribute to your elevating your LDL.
Which then could contribute to your atherosclerosis.
Yeah. One vicious circle.
It's a vicious cycle.
So and I think that is also the big key, and that is the common situation, is that people are in this tangle of metabolic syndrome where they get hit with the high cholesterol, they have high blood sugar, they have high blood pressure, they're overweight, they're obese, and it becomes, I think the clinical term is a clusterfuck. And they are now on this litany of, that's two litanies, of medications. And that we don't know up from down at that point. It snowballs from there.
Yeah, some of the interesting things found out, like there is some research that suggests that individuals using statins had over twice the likelihood of receiving a diabetes diagnosis compared to non-users of statins, and especially those taking the drug longer than 2 years. And again, that's part of the other piece of this, is there's no exit strategy to this that's ever given. It's just take the med, we'll keep doing the testing. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're not flagging over, or there's been maybe some reduction, which we know can happen. In this case, it happened for this guy by like 30%.
Yeah.
Right?
Statin worked.
The statin worked. We know that they work, quote unquote. But
so it's under control. Keep taking the medication, or it will no longer be under control.
But this could be contributing to, again, some level of insulin resistance for some people. And that's a thing that is not talked about. It's not something that we're hearing about. And there's not going to be a ton of research on this, right? Because the pharmaceutical companies aren't going to pay for this, right? And the doctors that get paid by the pharmaceutical companies are not going to pay for this. I don't see this as being a thing, but there's another thing here, and that is that these statins may inhibit the body's synthesis of vitamin K. So I mentioned vitamin K earlier. We mentioned calcification and vitamin and what may be happening in the bloodstream, but also with regard to the atherosclerosis. But vitamin K is 100% important in glucose metabolism. And so if we're not getting that vitamin K, we can't synthesize it, or if somehow it's being blocked, or we're limited on it, then obviously we're going to have issues with, again, the blood glucose, but more specifically the vitamin D, because vitamin D or K tells vitamin D what to do. Mm-hmm. And that vitamin D is part of the calcification process. So if it's not
regulates calcium levels in the blood versus 100%, in the bones.
100%. So going back, when we're looking at statins could be causing some level of insulin resistance. It also could be leading to this atherosclerosis, or these blockages that are happening, independent of the other things that are going on in the body, which is wild to think about. I mean, when you really...
and I think it all boils down, again, to the fact that, and I don't think primary care providers are to blame for this. They're within a system, and they're working within a system that is flawed. They don't have the time with each individual patient to go through all this nuance, or to check, if someone has been on a statin for an extended period of time, check their vitamin K levels to see if the depletion of vitamin K is actually contributing to the problem that we were trying to avoid in the first place.
No, most doctors
they don't have time to go through this nuance and this context, and I don't see that changing. And that's why I see the kind of intermediary, which would be like a health coach or a nutrition coach, nutritionist, that actually can get into the nuance and the context with a client or with a patient, and being that intermediary between them and their doctor. I see that as becoming more and more necessary and a vital part of the healthcare continuum.
Yeah, 100%. That's a huge piece of this. And we say this all the time. I'm not here to beat up physicians. They have a lot to do. Right. And they have an important job. So this is not a beat up that. I will beat up the pharmaceutical community for pushing and just making, I think they contribute to that, them having a lot to do in a lot of ways. But that's a different conversation. I think the message, maybe we can start to maybe shift the messaging now. And we're talking about people that have all of these metabolic issues that have kind of stacked on themselves, and now they're having to take these medications. But what about the people that are doing a really good job at trying to take care of their health and their wellness, and they're exercising regularly, and they are really monitoring and at least very conscious of what they're putting in their bodies, right? To decrease their body fat, to increase their energy levels, to decrease inflammation, to get better sleep, to all of these things. I think this is a thing, I think we're going to see more of this pop up as our population begins to age and our healthier population begins to age. And as it relates to the audience that's listening to this, I believe that's a good number of people. They're like, hey, I am trying to do the best I can with what I have, given my current situation. And I don't want to turn into one of these people that's dependent on my doctor and or the pharmaceutical, industry in order to manage myself. So what should I be looking out for? How do I advocate for myself? What are the things that I should be aware of as I'm going down my health and fitness journey here? What are the things that could come up for me? Okay, well, we already mentioned, if you've adopted this keto, low carb, carnivore lifestyle, more power to you. We've said it all the time. If that shit works for you, do it. Great. Whatever's working best for you, you do you.
Same thing with the plant-based.
Same thing with the plant-based. But in the same breath, we have to say, understand that with that will likely come with elevated triglycerides and elevated LDL and HDL as a result, because you are taking glucose from the system and you are intentionally trying to make your body more dependent on burning more body fat and or ketones for fuel. So you should expect if you go to get your blood draw done, that you might be above the quote unquote healthy or normal range. Be prepared for that, and be prepared for that conversation when you talk to your physician.
Yeah, and I've seen people who have been dissuaded by their doctor because they started, I'm gonna try that keto thing. I'm trying to lose some weight. I'm trying to lean out. I remember a specific conversation. For whatever reason, I had this conversation years ago, but I remember the guy specifically that he was coming into my supplement shop and I had seen him for a few weeks. He was doing the keto thing. So we were kind of working with that as far as the products that he was getting. And then he came in one day, he's like, yeah, I have to stop the keto thing. I went to the doctor and my LDL was high. My total cholesterol was high. He said the keto was causing that. And so I need to stop it. And we don't know. It could have been working for the guy. It could have ultimately gotten him to where he wanted to go, but he was dissuaded based on this one factor or this one marker without the whole context being looked at.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing we want to try to prep people for is how to advocate for yourself, how to ask the right questions, right? So, okay, so now what else is going on there? Again, we already talked about like the other factors that contribute to heart disease when we talked about these lipids, right? And the high versus the low density floating around there, as well as glucoproteins or glycoproteins that are floating around, how those interplay within in the system with regard to this atherosclerosis and or heart disease, as we're looking at things. So what else would pop up there if you have LDL or higher LDL, HDL, total triglycerides, total cholesterol? Some of the other things you might look at as a healthier individual are, what does my resting or my fasting glucose look like? What does my A1C look like? That is like my longer term blood sugar levels over about a 3-month period, right, in my body. Because if those are very low, right, or well within the healthy range, let's put it that way. I don't like the high versus low. They're constantly moving goalposts anyways. But that said, if you're not flagging there, right, and you're within a healthy range, yet you're eating fairly healthy and you're exercising regularly, again, drawing these triglycerides out of stored body fat, right, out of that stored body fat in order to use them, like this is probably not an issue for you. Smart docs will know this. Like we work with plenty of them, right, where they're looking at it going, yeah, this is not something I'm worried about.
Not a cause for concern. Yeah.
Not a cause for concern. Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned, like the C-reactive protein, your inflammatory markers. If your body is suffering, if you're going through, if you're on the early stages of heart disease, atherosclerosis, it's likely, again, going back to this guy who has ulcerative colitis that did this little experiment on himself, it's likely that your total inflammatory markers are going to be high. What does that say? Because if that isn't flagging, do we need to be worried about this?
Yeah, exactly. Is this really a problem? And I think that again, that's the main takeaway, is that it's not necessarily a problem in and of itself. And that I think is, I run into this often in my conversations with clients, again, with consults, where they are, it's high, therefore I have a problem. Well, do you have a problem? Did you actually look at the other numbers? How is everything else doing? Or even if you're not on a low carb or keto diet and you do have a little bit of elevated LDL or elevated total cholesterol, maybe you're consuming a little too much saturated fat. Is it just that you're consuming saturated fat at all? Or is that you're not getting adequate fiber along with the saturated fat that you're consuming?
Good point.
Most people don't realize that fiber plays a major role in how your body metabolizes fat, and how much fat either goes down your toilet or gets reabsorbed into your bloodstream. Mm-hmm. So, and again, that's when I was told I had high total cholesterol, I was not advised to increase my fiber consumption. I was just advised on what I couldn't have anymore.
Yes, stop doing this, not...
No advice on no advice on what you can actually do to balance it out, that it is possible to. And now I eat red meat and eggs and butter all the damn time. I also have a high fiber diet and my cholesterol numbers are fine. And that, I think that shocks a lot of people. I have that conversation often. Like, wait, what? Fiber? I thought that was just so I could take a crap. I don't have a problem with that, so I'm good, right? Well, you can actually use that as a bridge to a degree, have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah. So we've talked about sort of inflammatory markers. We've talked about what's going on with your blood glucose, your body's ability to deal with that. Like, again, glucose, glucagon, what is happening at the pancreas with regard to insulin there. All of those things are a factor ultimately in how this stuff impacts your body. Another thing to think about here is maybe you're getting on in life and you're trying to get to like a full blood panel. Like I need to get some markers. I need to kind of figure out where I am. Like that's an important thing to do. So and we try to encourage people to do that all the time.
Have some data.
Yeah, have some data. Just have a starting point. Have a baseline for now, and be aware. Like if you just get one thing, then you don't really have a baseline. You have one thing, and making all your decisions off of one thing, particularly as it looks like on paper, like versus how are we feeling? How are we performing? Is there any other symptomology here of any kind whatsoever? That's not a really smart prospect either. Yet that is often how people go in because they're feeling sick, not because they're healthy and they want to maintain their health. They're going in because they're feeling sick. They find this elevated thing, this downregulated other thing.
That's why I was feeling crappy. Here's the medicine that fixes why I feel crappy.
Yeah, and humans walk right out of the office expecting that, that's the answer. Like I take the drug, I feel better, health improves, which we already know the reality of that. But other things to think about here, like when you're going in for those blood panels, a couple things. One, for anybody out there that is on testosterone replacement therapy or HRT, if you're taking testosterone, you will have elevated cholesterol.
Proven right here.
Period. End of story. Yeah, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I remember I had a blood test last year, and I had my results, and I brought them home, and I showed them to Scott, and I think I was going to have you on the phone with me to have the consult to go over the results. And the doctor brought up the fact that my LDL was high, but my triglycerides and my HDL were all within normal range. And she was concerned. And so then I was concerned. But then Scott's like, wait a minute, hold on. You're on HRT. And I'm like, yep, you're right. And we were still playing with the levels. But I mean, it goes to show there again that like, yes, as far, and also my BMI, I was in a normal, healthy range.
Inflammatory markers are fine. Yep. A1C was fine.
Did
fasting glucose fine.
Did the doctor ask about the hormone therapy before they told you?
She's the one who put her on it. That was the whole thing.
That was the thing. That was the alarming thing.
And then was like, oh, why is the cholesterol
shaking
high?
My fucking head.
That actually makes it worse than where I was going with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got this. If you're taking this, if you're on HRT, men particularly expect that your cholesterol levels are going to be high. That's why you want to have a baseline going into taking any kind of testosterone replacement therapy.
What is the effect of this?
Yeah. What is okay? Yeah, you're leaning up, or you feel better, you have better libido, but you're not being monitored in any way whatsoever. Like that's a problem. So you may be getting the gear from the dude in the gym or wherever, your buddy who's got a double prescription somewhere or whatever else. These are things to think about. There's another piece of this too, as it relates to the thyroid and how thyroid is directly involved with the conversion of cholesterol into sex hormones. So if when we're looking at this sort of the bigger picture here, for a long time, a lot of people were blaming their thyroid for everything. But but the thyroid can be an issue.
That still happens. But yeah, it can be a genuine issue.
I'm gaining weight, it's my thyroid. Yeah. Right? Like it's obvious. No. Anything that may be going on with your thyroid is likely a symptom of your shitty lifestyle and and the food that you eat and the exercise that you don't do and the sleep that you don't get and all of those kind of things. But that said, it is critical, right? In this this balance and this triad of things that is going on in the body at any given time from a hormone or endocrine perspective. So when we're looking at this conversion of sex or cholesterol into sex hormones, when thyroid function is compromised, you could also have compromised cholesterol synthesis happening within the liver. So important to understand, like, hey, this might be something you want to understand too. Like, how is my thyroid function just in general? And this goes beyond the TSH test. We haven't talked about this in a long time, but thyroid stimulating hormone is basically the messenger that says, that basically tells the thyroid to produce thyroxine, T3, T4. There's a lot of things going on there. Just because the messenger is high signaling system is high doesn't necessarily mean the thyroid is receiving that signal and or doing what it should be doing with it. So when you're looking at thyroid tests or you're looking at these full blood panels, when we get into LDL, HDL, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, these are things that you need to advocate for yourself for. I want a full thyroid panel.
I think that's very important to emphasize because I've definitely witnessed that where if you don't ask for the full panel and even at times push for the full panel,
you have to push.
You will not get the full panel. Yeah. Well, Because I don't see why that's necessary.
That's because you don't understand.
There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, you don't understand.
Yeah, right? I don't care if there's nothing wrong with me.
That's why I'm here.
That way.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm here. So again, for those people that are trying to stay healthy and you're going in for these blood panels, like again, thyroid, conversion of cholesterol into sex hormones, critical. So if you're having conversion issues, or you're having testosterone, pregnenolone is the major one with regard to the on the sex hormone side of things, with regard to cholesterol and thyroid. All of those things are super important. So things to think about as you're going into it, and again, and what you're coming out with in terms of total information. So again, obviously, sex hormone panels would be important there as well, both testosterone and estrogen and estradiol, free, total. All of those things are important. We've talked about that on the show before. But again, just to make the point, dudes, if you're on TRT, you should expect that your HDL and LDL are going to be elevated. Your cholesterol will be elevated, and
that doesn't necessarily mean that you need a statin.
No, 100% does not mean that. So, again, if you're, I think one of the major takeaways from today should be like, if I am eating or if I have adopted this very low carb, lifestyle, I should expect also at some level that my LDL, HDL will be elevated beyond what might be looked at.
Yeah, out of range.
Out of range. They do not do these tests. They do not set these actuated or relative values based on healthy people that work out. They're based on fat and sick people in general. The quote unquote normal population, the general population is fat and sick.
The standard's pretty low.
It's pretty low. So you're not going to fall into that. So part of this may be getting yourself with a physician or somebody that kind of understands this a little bit more. Or if you're just having these done, you can have all these panels done without the help of a physician. You don't need a physician to do this. You can pay for this yourself. You straight on down to LabCorp or wherever you want to go and say, I want this, and you pay out of pocket and you can get it all. I'm not saying you should read your own blood panels, but there's a lot of information that can be gleaned there, and then finding a physician that can work with you to maybe, interpret what these things mean based on your current situation, but also get yourself with a physician that's not purely managing things based on blood panels, right? That's another thing. And I think this is probably what I don't want to put words in your mouth, Stephen, but maybe what a lot of these clients are dealing with is they're dealing with the physician that has ordered a test, has ordered some type of an assessment. That assessment has shown up. They're seeing it 3 minutes before they walk in the door to the appointment.
Glance, yep.
They have at best, I think it's total 5 to 7 minutes, I think is average with the patient now. That sounds even high to me for a lot of people based on what's going on out there, but they spend 5 to 7 minutes with their patient, and it almost always includes, as we well know, some type of a prescription for a drug based on the panel that they're looking at with no questions around what is your lifestyle, what are some other symptoms that you're having, talk to me about your diet, talk to me about your exercise program, how much do you sleep, right? Well, let's talk about your stress levels and what you're doing, around any of this.
Yeah, and the patients, they come in, they expect a result right then and there, and the result is, again, okay, well, my total cholesterol is high, that's bad. Give me a pill to fix it. Like, okay, result of going to the doctor's office acquired.
Instant gratification.
So, and again, I don't think that is necessarily the doctor's fault that they only have 5 to 7 minutes to see you. I mean, I couldn't address someone's lifestyle factors in 5 to 7 minutes. Couldn't even begin.
And while they could prescribe, some type of nutrition counseling, or whatever to somebody, they're not going to do that. But they could suggest it. Maybe you want to go get yourself a nutrition coach and a personal trainer.
I mean, if I would fully support, if those GPs are out there, more power to them. I feel like that is probably going to be an exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, if there's any GP out there that's listening to this, or anybody that's in the medical profession or is an allied healthcare professional that is looking for clients, we got a shit ton of them that need good doctors, right? If you take insurance, that's especially helpful, but I also understand that you don't. And here's an interesting part about this is about the kind of that reference or that referral thing back and forth. So here we are talking about our clients. If we tell our client to go see a doctor, they go see that doctor. But if the doctor tells them to go see a personal trainer or a nutrition coach, or whatever, they never go. But
funny how that works.
So I'm telling you, you healthcare professionals out there, like if we tell our clients to trust us implicitly, that pay us way more fucking money than they pay you because insurance is paying for you, and we tell them to come see you, and we know you're going to get paid. Like I'm telling you, you're going to get paid. Like because people, they already trust us, they're already listening to us, and we will send them to you. So if you're one of those folks out there, hit us up. We'd be happy to send you some. So we have tons of clients that could use
I get asked
help
about it often.
all the time versus, the person that's thumbing through the book, or not so much anymore, thumbs through their cell phone to find who's in network and who's convenient and who can take their appointment inside a 2-month window, since everybody's, all these physicians are stacked all the time. So anyway, end of the day, going back to Oreos, LDL experiments versus, analysis and peer-reviewed journals and things like that. I love what this guy did. I'm glad we're having this conversation. At first I was like, dude, we're doing this again. But I often forget these are the things that people need to be reminded of. And there will be people listening to this stuff that had no idea. And I'm not a physician. I'm no scientist. I never claimed to be. But the stuff that we're talking about, actually, the experts generally agree on this stuff. The interesting part is nobody is pushing back in the doctor's office when they're being prescribed a statin. To your point, they just want the pill. They want to be fixed.
I want a result. Yeah.
And until that happens, like we're just going to keep going down this road. So we know that most of the people listening to this show don't do that. They are looking for some answers. So hopefully we gave you a few questions to ask your physician, a few things to prepare yourself for, some ways to manage your expectations. The rules are, I think in general, to preventing yourself from getting into the scenario in the first place where you have these metabolic disorders are the very basic fundamentals that we talk about on a regular basis.
All the time.
All the time. There's nothing sexy here. Don't eat Oreos. I'm not saying start an Oreo diet today. The point of that is this guy ate sugar and it lowered his LDL. Why? Because he didn't need the fatty acids anymore. Right? He didn't need those in his system anymore. Period.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah. He described it as it was a metabolic demonstration that I think shined a light on the fact that you shouldn't take these blood test results at face value if you have not looked a little deeper into the context. And that's just why I wanted to have this conversation, or why it stood out to me, was because I still have those conversations with clients who do take those results at face value, because the doctor is the trusted professional. Everybody tells me to go see the doctor.
They should
consult with the doctor, and therefore I trust what the doctor says, and the doctor says that this is a problem and it needs to be medicated or it needs to be addressed. Maybe it does. For some people, it absolutely does. And for people who have, very high LDL or elevated cholesterol, for some people that is a legitimate problem. And a statin would be helpful for them, but it's overprescribed for people who don't necessarily need it. And all of the factors that are involved are not always analyzed. And that's the big takeaway. Yeah.
And so I think when you talk to the doctors that have stepped away from, say, like emergency medicine or their typical GP, their typical practice, like family practice, to do something that comes at it from a more holistic perspective, which often means it's more cash-based in terms of what they do. They can order your insurance might still pay for some of these blood tests and things like that. The point of this is the reason they did that is because they're tired. They're tired. They're tired of dealing with what we just talked about. Like, they don't want to be in that situation anymore. They want to be more on the front end of it, just like you, the person listening right now, that wants to be on the front end of being in control of your health, not putting somebody else in control or depending on somebody else to do it for you. And so there are docs out there. There are some amazing ones, physicians, practitioners that will work with you on this stuff. In the interim, if you're looking for maybe some answers about how to, here's what you're seeing, here's what you've been challenged with, how do you kind of get around maybe some of this through like an exercise and more of a dietary, from the angle of adjusting your diet or your exercise program, your supplementation and things like that, because all of these things do play into those fundamentals that we already talked about. We have Steven here, we have some other professionals here that you can reach out to. If you go to rdftrainonline.com and you go to basically the virtual coaching stuff, you will find in there that you can have a consult with Steven.
free of charge.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We can do, you can do something as quickly as 15 to 30 minutes, just kind of sitting, kind of talking about things. Maybe he can point you in the right direction, make some suggestions, or maybe there's a program that we can get you on that could be very helpful for you, or just help adjust the one that you're already on. And maybe it's helping connect you with, the right kind of physician or allied health professional in your area. Maybe it's somebody we know, or maybe we can help you quickly search around and see if you can find somebody. We know a lot of people in a lot of places these days to help connect the dots for you. We're not here to read blood panels. We see a lot of them. We're not here to
read one this morning.
Yeah, we're not here to evaluate and tell you all the things that you're supposed to do with your blood panel. But there's things that we can talk about, right? And maybe help you understand what your blood panel is telling you, and maybe give you some questions so you can maybe advocate for yourself. And I think that's the major thing that we do, is educate people on the questions to ask. So when they do find their physician, and then prepare them for the answers they might get in return, so that they can make they can ask more informed questions, and then have maybe a more informed response to whatever they're getting. So check out rdftrainonline.com. You can go to the virtual coaching page or our nutrition coaching page, and you can directly connect. You can schedule an appointment right there with Stephen for free.